Now, Jack, you've got to pay attention. You've got to do exactly what we say. Number one, you've got to jump when you're told. Number two, you count to 10 and then you pull the rip cord. All right? Now, number three, Jack, in the unlikely event that the parachute does not open, then you are to pull the emergency cord. And then number four, there will be a truck down on the ground waiting to take you back to the airport. You got that, Jack? He said, sure, I've got that. So we got on the plane, and the plane took off the runway, started rising in there, finally got to 10,000 feet, which was the appropriate height for them to make their jump. And he had memorized all the steps, and he was ready to go, and finally came that time, and they told Jack to jump. And so he jumped. He counted to 10, and he pulled the cord. Nothing happened. So immediately he pulled the emergency cord, and nothing happened. And he said, you know what, I bet that truck won't be down there either. Well, you know, maybe you're here today, and it just seems that nothing is going right in your life, nothing is going according to plan. And the worst part of it is, nobody seems to care. And the truck isn't going to be there either. We find a similar situation in the life of the disciples in Mark chapter 4. I want you to read it with me together. Mark chapter 4, verses 35 through 41. I'll be reading from the New American Standard Version. It says, and on that day when the evening had come, he said to them, let us go over to the other side. And leaving the multitude, they took him along with them just as he was in the boat. And other boats were with him. And there arose a fierce gale of wind, and the waves were breaking over the boat so much that the boat was already filling up. And he himself was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they awoke him and said to him, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? And being aroused, he rebuked the wind and said to the sea, Hush, be still. And the wind died down and became perfectly calm. And he said to them, Why are you so tender? How is it that you have no faith? And they became very much afraid and said to one another, Who then is this that even the wind and the sea would obey him? The title of today's message is Standing in the Storm. Because like Jack and the disciples, we often find ourselves in situations that we just don't understand, that maybe are just beyond our control, and it seems like the storm of life is raging all around us, and we just don't know what we're going to do. And today we're going to look at four things that storms do, and the first two have to do with our reaction to those storms, and then the last two have to do with the response that God is really looking for when those storms come up. And to properly understand what's going on here, I think we need to go back just a couple of verses to just before this parable was told, or this story was told. In verses 33 and verses 34, it says that Jesus was talking with them in parables. And with many such parables or stories, he was speaking the word to them as they were able to hear it. And he did not speak to them without a parable, but he was explaining everything privately to his own disciples. I just think it's interesting to note that Jesus had been using basic life experiences like the sower, the seed, the gardening parable, the mustard seed. All these had to do with areas of life where the people needed to grow in their faith with God. But then when he wanted to explain the deeper spiritual truths of things, he would get the disciples off to the side, and he'd get them along. Maybe God sensed that they still just weren't getting it, that is, the disciples. And so he allowed them to have their own real, true life experience to teach them a deep spiritual truth about their own faith. Maybe the disciples had been critical of the lack of faith in the others that Jesus had been teaching. Yeah, look at them. They don't know what they're doing. They don't have any faith. Or maybe they felt like their own faith was above reproach. But whatever their thinking might have been, it was fixing to be put to the test. And so how did the elite, the chosen, the anointed, the leaders of modern Christianity, how did the disciples fare up when their own faith was challenged? Well, they cried like little girls. That's right. They cried like little girls because they were afraid they were going to die. And that's the first thing I want us to look at today is that, number one, storms cause fear. When they come, the storms of life cause a lot of fear. The disciples, the Bible said, was afraid. The wind was fierce, the waves were pounding, the water was coming in the boat, and they feared that the end was near. Maybe you're here this morning, and you have personal storms that are raging in your life. Maybe they're marital storms. Maybe they're extended family storms. Maybe they're relationship storms. Financial storms. The list could go on and on. But some of you here this morning, the storm is raging in your life, and you fear the end is near. You know, just like the disciples, we've all heard the stories of God being on His throne, haven't we? We hear that when the storm's raging, people say, well, it's all right, God's on His throne. God's still in control. And we go and we study Bible studies how to increase our faith and how to stand strong, and having done all just to stand. We study that, don't we? But then the storms of life hit us, and it seems like they just almost consume us. And all those things we study, just doesn't seem like it's doing any good. You know, it's been said that 80% of the stuff that we worry about never happens. You know, maybe that's true, but it's that other 20% that kind of keeps me tore up. What about you? You know? Maybe it doesn't happen that way, but 20% can get us going, can't it? And so we see the disciples' reaction to the real-life test was fear and doubt. And maybe that's where you find yourself this morning with the storm of life. And the way that you have responded is you have a lot of fear, but we also see that a second thing happens. Not only do storms cause fear in our life, a great amount of it, but it also leads to frustration. Storms just cause frustration. Did the disciples wake Jesus up during the severe storm and say to Jesus, now Jesus, I hate to bother you, but we got a little situation here. No, that's not the way they did it. Did they say, now Jesus, I know we have gone over this before, and you're rested, and we've got our plan together. You know, we've all mustered up before, and we know what we're supposed to do in case of an emergency, but would you mind going over just one more time? No, that's not what the disciples did. Matter of fact, in the last part of verse 38, it says, according to the New Living Translation, that the disciples woke him up shouting, Teacher, don't you care that we're going to drown? They were frustrated. Have the storms of life that you have been dealing with lately caused you to be frustrated? Does it feel like God has been asleep while your life has been in turmoil? Does it? Have you just wanted to shout at the top of your lungs for God just to wake up? You know, there's been times of storm in my life where I felt like God was in a coma. I did. I'm a minister. I'm a trained professional in the gospel art. Hallelujah. But to me, God was in a coma. I couldn't find him. I truly felt like I was going down for the last time on occasion, and that God just didn't care. I said, if this is what I've sold my life out to, and this is all there is, then I might ought to reconsider what's happening. And if true discipleship equated to being like the disciples up to this point, we'd all have it made, wouldn't we? Fear and frustration. But it's here where our story takes a very huge turn. Because so far what we've seen out of the disciples, and usually our response to the storm, is fear and frustration. But now we're going to focus on the response that God is looking for. And whatever you do, don't miss this. This is the reason that the storm is raging to start with. And that is, number 3, storms not only cause fear and frustration, but they challenge our faith. That's why the storm is going on. They challenge their faith. And I love verse 39. After Jesus is awakened, he says 2 short phrases. I love it. He says, shut up and settle down. Now, our version says, hush and be still. And maybe he said it that way, but I kind of think it was more like, shut up and settle down. And I'm not so sure he was just talking to the storm. But that's exactly what happened. The storm was immediately gone, and that was a miracle in and of itself. So much so that the Bible seems to indicate that the disciples were stunned. And before they can even take it all in, what just happened around them, Jesus not only rebukes the storm, but he starts kind of getting on their case a little bit too. And maybe he put it this way, he said, why are you living in fear of your future, guys? Why are you worried about whether you're going to die or not? Why are you frustrated with my level of faith and me being asleep over here? That's not your problem. Where did your faith run off to? You know, don't be messing with me. And I think Jesus was probably thinking, no, I'm not concerned about the wind howling out there and the waves beating up against the boat and the water coming all in the boat. I mean, why fret over a little water when you can walk on it? But see, he hadn't yet done that. He probably thought, they're not ready for this. I better wait a couple of weeks. And we see where Jesus walked on the water in chapter 6, just a couple chapters later. That's why Jesus wasn't afraid. He says, I'm not worried because I have faith, fellas. I have faith. In verse 40, he says, why are you so afraid? Why is it that you have no faith? If our response during recent storms has been one of fear and frustration, then Jesus asked us the same question. How is it that you have no faith in me? Yes, you feel like I'm in a coma. You feel like I'm not there anymore. You're afraid. You're frustrated. But where's the faith? You know, my prayer is that my own faith will increase enough to take me to the place where I am literally stunned by the miracle that God has waited for. But see, we have to have that faith, or we never get to the miracle. The why God let this storm come in my life to start with was because it challenged my faith. No, I don't know about you. As long as everything's hunky-dory in my life, I don't need God very much. Is that not true? Sure it is. So quit whining about the storm going on in your life. Stop being fearful and frustrated. Start looking at why God is challenging your faith. And then increase that faith, because the last thing that we see that storms can do for us is they can form us if we let them. Verse 41 says that another kind of fear came over the disciples. It went past the fear of the storm and it raging and them about to die. And look at it, it says, and they became very much afraid and said to one another, who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him? These are the guys that had been with Jesus day and night now for some time. And they said, who is this? You see, that storm that raged caused them to have a whole new perspective on this man named Jesus. Their faith was still so immature that they had no idea who Jesus really was and what he could accomplish in their life. So why the storm? Well, apparently it changed their life. God accomplished a level of spiritual growth from the storm that just hadn't took up to that point. All those little campfire Bible studies and kumbaya just hadn't got it done. But now, something happened. You see, sitting around listening to stories about how other people grow in their faith just didn't increase their own